This is a racetrack in peacetime. But during World War II, it was a place of confinement for thousands of people. These people of Japanese ancestry were almost all American citizens. Most of them had been born in the United States and were citizens from birth, like young Fred. None was here for any offense he had committed. Then why were they here? Why were they confined? Could they properly be held behind barbed wire? These were questions raised in a legal dispute, Korematsu versus the United States. A case that went to the United States Supreme Court and became a chapter in the history of the United States Constitution, an opinion affecting many people, a crucial decision. The events of December 7th, 1941, and the weeks that followed, the loss of island bases and ships, of planes and of men, brought to the home front a huge mobilization of energy.
A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Under our Constitution, the war powers of government are not unlimited, but they are great. The power to wage war, the Supreme Court has said, is the power to wage war successfully. Thus, government, in the cause of survival, enlisted the nation's youth, imposed controls on industry, and instituted many restraints for the nation's security. In the western states, security held a special meaning. Military areas were designated to cover the entire coast. Under a presidential order, a commanding general could exclude any person from any part of a military area. Congress confirmed this power to exclude. How far could such a power go? There were, on the West Coast, 100,000 people of Japanese descent. Some of these were aliens who could be interned. But 2/3 were American-born citizens. Farmers, industrial workers, businessmen, fishermen. If they, as citizens, had rights which could not be abridged in peace or war, what were they? These were the issues in Korematsu versus the United States. Fred, an American citizen, was born in Oakland, California in 1919. As a boy, he lived in East Oakland with his father, mother, and 3 brothers. His father was a nurseryman. Fred attended public school in Oakland. He grew up speaking English, knowing little Japanese, unable to write it. His best friends were Caucasians. After high school, he attended Los Angeles Junior College for a time, but left for lack of funds. He returned home to work in his father's nursery. When the Selective Service Act was passed in 1940, he registered for the draft, but was rejected for minor physical deficiencies. So he took a course in welding. In the West Coast war plants, manpower was needed, especially skilled labor. Some weeks before Pearl Harbor, he got a job in a shipyard doing defense work. In November 1941, the papers spoke of Japanese troop movements in Asia, which were causing concern in Washington. Early in December, President Roosevelt was addressing an urgent appeal to the Japanese emperor. Some special Japanese envoys were in Washington, conferring with the State Department. Throughout these weeks, Fred kept working. When Pearl Harbor came, he continued with the job. He tried again to enter the armed forces, but was again rejected. He kept on welding. Then one day, because of car trouble, he was late for work and was sent to the security office.
Sit down, Fred. You were late for work this morning. Why?
Well, this morning I had trouble with my car.
Fred, I'd like you to tell me everything that you've done for the past 12 hours. Where you've been, who you've talked to, everything. Do you understand?
Yes.
Do it carefully. I better warn you that everything you say will be checked.
Well, last night I was out with a friend.
Japanese?
No.
Around noon, he was again summoned to the security office.
Fred, two men were seen taking pictures in the shipyard this morning. Do you know anything about it?
No, I don't know anything about it.
A witness said that one of them looked like he was of Italian descent. Could you tell us any more?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Are you sure?
I'm sure, absolutely.
All right, Fred, you can go.
The following day, Fred was told he could no longer work in the shipyard. The union, it was explained, had declared him in bad standing because of unpaid dues. However, Fred presently found work at a steel fabricating shop in San Francisco. As an independent contractor, he welded 60 cranes for the arsenal. Meanwhile, the area had been designated a military area, and by military order, a curfew was established for Americans of Japanese ancestry. After 6 o'clock, they were not to be out of their homes. To work at any distance from home became impractical. Soon there were other security measures. Fred's home stood next to a small factory under contract for war work. One day, floodlights were installed on the factory. Now, each night, Fred's home was flooded with light while guards patrolled. Then came a new order. No American of Japanese ancestry might leave the area in which he lived without special Army permission. This was followed by further proclamations. By order of General John L. DeWitt, commanding general of the Western Defense Command, a series of exclusion orders was announced. Americans of Japanese ancestry were ordered to report immediately for detention and eventual transportation to special camps. Those in Oakland were to report within 6 days to Tanforan Racetrack. They were to bring bedding and linens, no mattresses. Also, toilet articles, tableware, and dishes, no pets. The United States government, said the order, would store their larger possessions, such as pianos or iceboxes, but at the sole risk of the owner. Within a few days, in the West Coast states, 70,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry disposed of their businesses, sold, rented, or abandoned their homes, and reported to the assembly centers. From Oakland and surrounding area, 7,928 persons came to Tanforan Racetrack, now turned into a military stockade. But there should have been one more. Fred did not go. Instead, he went to a rooming house under an assumed name. Accepted as Chinese, he got another job at a trailer center on MacArthur Boulevard. In nearby San Leandro was a girl he'd been seeing lately, not of Japanese descent. They had talked, rather vaguely, of marrying and moving to the Midwest. Might this still be possible? One evening, he drove to San Leandro to discuss it with her. In a drugstore, he bought cigarettes. Perhaps he was recognized there.
What is your nationality?
Presently, he was taken to San Francisco County Jail. The federal government began prosecution for violation of the exclusion order. Then, at the jail, Fred had a visitor.
My name is Ernest Bessick, Fred. I don't suppose you've ever heard of me. I'm from the San Francisco office of the American Civil Liberties Union. I read about your case in the paper this morning. Are you represented by an attorney?
No, sir, I'm not.
We believe your constitutional rights have been violated. Now, we're willing to represent you unless you have funds to represent yourself. Do you have money to hire an attorney?
No.
Well, we're willing to take your case to the U.S. Supreme Court. We don't believe that the Army had any right to discriminate against you because of your race. We don't believe they may detain you in what we regard as concentration camps. Now, if you'd like us to handle your case, we'll be happy to do so.
Yes, I would like.
In United States District Court, bail was set at $1,000, then increased to $2,500. Ernest Bessig put up the bail, but instead of freeing Fred, this merely put him into military custody. He was taken to Tanforan Racetrack. There, like thousands of others, he had a cot in a horse stall. There, like thousands of others, he waited. Meanwhile, Ernest Bessig and attorney Wayne Collins were preparing their argument.
Is the Constitution of the United States a protection in wartime as well as in peacetime? If it is, then persons of Japanese ancestry shouldn't be treated any differently than other persons.
Their position rested on numerous legal precedents, among them an historic case.
In his favor, in the case of Ex parte Milligan.
Ex parte Milligan, a case of Civil War days. In the early days of the war, Federal forces were in trouble in their western campaigns. Their losses were heavy. In southern Kentucky, they had been routed. Throughout the area, the Confederate armies took control and pushed northward. A struggle of supply lines developed. Meanwhile, to the north, Indiana waited, expectant. Though loyal to the Union, she had many settlers of Southern descent. Some had Southern sympathies. During the following months, some were arrested, among them Lambdin P. Milligan, a civilian and citizen of Indiana. Seized by military order, he was put in a military prison. As a civilian, he challenged the Army's right to hold him. His protest was rejected. He was tried by the military for aiding the enemy and other crimes against the Union. He was sentenced to be hanged. As the war approached its end, the gallows stood ready for him, but an appeal was in progress. As to those charged with aiding the enemy, President Lincoln had declared the privilege of habeas corpus suspended, and Congress had confirmed this, provided the facts in each case were presented to the next federal grand jury. No grand jury had acted in Milligan's case. Attorneys for Milligan now petitioned for his release. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. In 1866, it decided unanimously that Milligan must be freed, but the majority went further. In a sweeping statement read by Justice Davis, it said, "From what source did the military commission derive their authority to try him? If in foreign invasion or civil war the courts are actually closed, Then, on the theater of active military operations, as no power is left but the military, it is allowed to govern by martial rule. But martial rule can never exist where the courts are open. The Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and people, equally in war and in peace, and covers with the shield of its protection all classes of men. So Milligan was released. But should all this not apply even more to Fred, also a citizen and civilian? The Army had not tried him, but to be ordered from home by the military and held without any charge of disloyalty, was this more defensible than a military trial? This military confinement, was it not even more a violation of constitutional guarantees? In resisting such detention, was he not within his rights? In September, Fred's case came up in United States District Court. The defendant was found guilty of disobeying the exclusion order and was placed on probation for 5 years. While his lawyers prepared an appeal, Fred was taken back to Tanforan. But presently all the inhabitants of Tanforan were moved to a new place, a dusty, windswept plain, Topaz, Utah. Here, an encampment of wooden barracks was rising from the desert. Sewers were dug. Victory gardens were planted. After a time, some were released for outside work, among them Fred. Once more, he would be in war production. Meanwhile, his lawyer's appeal moved slowly toward a final settlement in United States Supreme Court. Argument was scheduled for October 1944. The case was to be heard in the same session as another somewhat similar case, ex parte Mitsui Endo. Mitsui Endo was a girl from Pasadena, California. She too had gone to an assembly center and been moved to Topaz, Utah. She too, after investigation, was given permission for outside work. But now she brought suit demanding absolute release. Unlike Fred, she was not challenging the order that had expelled her from home and put her in confinement. She challenged only the government's right to continue to hold her in Utah now that it conceded her loyalty. Thus, two cases, similar but different. They were decided the same day. In ex parte Endo, the court was unanimous. The decision was read by Justice Douglas. He said, "We are of the opinion that Mitsui Endo should be given her liberty. The Act of March 21, 1942, was a war measure. The single aim was the protection of the war effort against espionage and sabotage. Detention which has no relationship to that objective is unauthorized. Mitsui Endo is entitled to unconditional release." In Fred's case, the court, by 6-3, upheld the government. For the majority, Justice Black said this: "Our task would be simple, our duty clear, were this a case involving imprisonment because of racial prejudice. But he was not excluded from the military area because of hostility to him or his race. He was excluded because we are at war with the Japanese Empire, because our military authorities feared an invasion of our west coast and felt constrained to take proper security measures, because they decided that the military urgency of the situation demanded that all citizens of Japanese ancestry be segregated from the west coast temporarily, and finally, because Congress, reposing its confidence in our military leaders, determined that they should have the power to do this. We cannot, by availing ourselves of the calm perspective of hindsight, now say that at that time these actions were unjustified. In this case, there were 3 dissenters. Among them, Justice Murphy said, "This exclusion goes over the very brink of constitutional power into the ugly abyss of racism. Individuals must not be left impoverished of their constitutional rights on a plea of military necessity that has neither substance nor support. Not one person of Japanese ancestry was accused or convicted of espionage or sabotage after Pearl Harbor while they were still free." It seems incredible that under these circumstances it would have been impossible to hold loyalty hearings, at least for the 70,000 American citizens, especially when a large part of this number represented children and elderly men and women. I dissent, therefore, from this legalization of racism. To give constitutional sanction is to adopt one of the cruelest of the rationales used by our enemies to destroy the dignity of the individual and to encourage discriminatory actions against other minority groups in the passions of tomorrow. To Fred's story, we must add a final chapter. Some years after the war, he went back to Oakland. For a while, he worked at the same shipyard as before. But now he was starting a new career as engineering draftsman. Now Fred is married. His children are growing up in Oakland. By an act of Congress, many Japanese Americans have been reimbursed for property losses they had suffered. The suspicions, the hostilities of other years have now apparently vanished. It is well that we can record this change, but perhaps it is also well that we remember the events of other years and the constitutional precedent they may have created in the name of military necessity. The men who wrote this document lived in an agricultural society, very different from ours today. It is a measure of their wisdom that their plan of government still provides us with a workable framework for decision. Yet, as we have gone from yesterday's world into the world of our times, the Constitution has been subjected to countless stresses and problems of interpretation. This film dealt with one of those many problems.